Okay, so I'd like to make sure that we really cover the different types of epithelial tissue by function. And so we talked in the lab a lot about structural categories of epithelia, but I really want to get into these functional categories. So specifically, we're going to have either epithelia or glands, okay? And this is really where you're going to find it. Epithelia, it's going to cover body surfaces, line internal cavities and organs, or line the inside of vessels or other sorts of tubing in the body. Where glands, they're going to secrete things. Now you've got two types. You've got exocrine glands, which secrete things onto a surface. And then you also have endocrine glands, which are going to secrete chemicals internally into the bloodstream. So if we're looking at our notes packet, here, if we think about epithelia first, let's think about where they're found. So what we just listed, they're on exposed surfaces, lining internal cavities, and lining the inside vessels and other tubing in the body. And so what is the function of this epithelium? Well, it receives sensations, so if it's near the, so it receives sensations, a rich nerve supply. A lot of times it's going to help to lubricate, so it may be embedded with glands that help keep that surface moist. So it's going to help to lubricate. It's going to help to protect sometimes from abrasion or chemicals, anything of that nature. And the other thing it does, it's going to control permeability. So what that means is that it's going to control what can get across that tissue. If you remember, since it's on surfaces, anything trying to get to deeper tissues has to go through an epithelial tissue, and so it really functions as a tissue barrier to let some things through and others not through. Okay, so again, like we said, exocrine glands, these are going to secrete some sort of liquid onto a surface, whereas endocrine glands, they're going to secrete hormones into the bloodstream. So what that means is exocrine glands are going to be found near surfaces. So generally they're going to be embedded within epithelial tissue, or at least close by. And then endocrine glands, those are going to be internal. Okay. All right. So one thing that it mentions in your homework lesson is that if we take just glands, we can actually classify them depending on the mechanism of secretion. So that means, how do they secrete liquids, secrete molecules, chemicals onto the surface? And so if we look here at your textbook, and I'm actually going to go back to page 124, it shows you those different mechanisms. So up here, first we have merocrine secretion, and this is where we just have small vesicles packed with some sort of contents, and it just releases those vesicles by exocytosis. We learned about that in chapter 3, and those contents are released to the outside. Now, another type of secretion that we have that's a little bit more different is called apocrine, and you may notice that apocrine, a piece, is close to apical. And so what happens, these are the secretory cells, and you may notice this is how it starts off. And the apical portion actually sheds off the finger, or sheds off that part. It would be like if my hand was a secretory cell and it just lost a finger, and that was the secretion. Okay, and then this part breaks down. And what happens is that these cells can regrow, and then this apical portion of the cell will then be pinched off and degrade and become that secretion again. And then, even more radical, is we have what's called holocrine secretion. And here, these cells down at the bottom, they're constantly making daughter cells. So here's a mother cell, and it's constantly making a daughter cell. And as these daughter cells gets pushed to the surface, the top ones, the whole cell will disintegrate, and that's what releases the secretion. And so these are the different mechanisms of secretion. Mechanism meaning how does it secrete, okay? And it's showing you that saliva, that's by merocrine secretion. The mammary gland, which produces breast milk, that's going to be by apocrine secretion. And then if we're actually looking at, we'll learn more about these, but these are sebaceous glands that are right next to hair follicles, and they produce a lot of the oil that keeps skin from drying out. These release their contents by holocrine secretion. Now, if we're looking here at exocrine glands again, we can also classify them, instead of by how they secrete, we can classify them based on their structure. So the simplest type of structure that we can have is a unicellular gland. Uni meaning one, so it's a gland made up of one cell. And here is that cell shown right here. Okay, we're going to commonly see these actually lining that internal tubing of the digestive tract. And these are mucus producing cells. They're actually called goblet cells. Goblet cells. All right. And these cells are actually packed with mucus, and then they just release this mucus onto the surface, and that's what they constantly do. And it turns out mucus is actually quite important. It helps to keep things moving down the digestive tract so that it doesn't get stuck. But then we have multicellular glands. So these are going to be glands made up of many cells, multicellular. And we have these different ways of classifying them. So we can classify them based on the number of ducts. If they only have one duct, they're simple. If they have many, they're called compound. So again, if we look here in your book on page 125 and come down here, the first thing to notice on this is that the purple cells are duct cells, and then the pink cells are gland cells, meaning the gland cells are the ones that make the secretions. And so you notice here, it's simple because we only have one duct. Here we have one duct. Even though we've got 3 branches here, each branch only has gland cells, the only part that's just duct cells. And duct cells, they just help make up the passageway. They just sit there and make up the passageway. They don't secrete anything. So this one, even though there's 3 different passageways, they're lined completely by cells that are secreting things. So it technically only has one duct, here one duct, here one duct. So those are called simple glands. Now if they have more than one duct, so you see here, well, we have a duct off to the side, and we've got some of those duct cells going here, duct cells here, duct cells here. So we have more than one passageway that's lined by duct cells, and so that makes it to be a compound. You can see that again here, duct cells going into this passageway, duct cells going into a second passageway, a third, a fourth, a fifth passageway. And so that's what makes these glands compound. Now another thing to be aware of is that if it has, you look at the number of secretory portions. So if it's got one pocket, if it has more than one pocket, then it's going to be called branched. Okay. So again, if we look here, we can say just one pocket, so we don't worry about adding the word branched. Same with this, one pocket. But here we've got 1, 2, 3, and so notice that branched is in the title. Same over here, we've got 1, 2, 3, so branched is in the title. Okay, and we do that if they are a simple gland. Okay. And then the last naming scheme is going to be the shape of the secretory portion. So tubular is just straight. alveolar looks like a round bulb, and then we've got coil, which looks like a coil. If you have both tubular and alveolar structures, you get a new name called tubuloalveolar. And so again, let's look at this. Okay, it's just straight down, so it's tubular. Here we have it coiling around, so it's coiled tubular. Alright, these, even though it's branched, they're straight down, so they're tubular. This one is the one that looks like a rounded bulb, so it's alveolar. Okay, and then here we have some are tubular and some are alveolar, so that's where we get the tubuloalveolar. So these are the different types of structures that we see, and we just combine those names. We say it only has one portion of duct, so it's simple. We have we only have one pocket, so we don't use the word branched, and that pocket is shaped like a tube straight down, so it's simple tubular. And so that's how you come up with those names. Okay, and so that's looking at functional categories of epithelia glands, and then looking at how you can further classify the different types of glands based on how they secrete or based on what their structures are. And here's some activities to help you to make sure that you really have this material down.